Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. And thank you for joining us for this session today. My name is Amar, and I welcome you on behalf of Sankalp and Intellecap. Many of you might have been to Sankalp summits in the past, and while we will miss the energy that is quite palpable at the summits, we are confident that this virtual format will be a good replacement in terms of the outcomes envisaged. I trust you have been able to attend the various sessions thus far and have been able to network with like-minded people. The objective of this session is to foreground the conversation about investing with a gender lens in what we are calling women-enabling businesses or gender-smart businesses. These are businesses that might not be women-owned, but have a significant impact on women by way of creating livelihoods for them, where few or none exist, or by providing goods and services that improve their lives. Investing in such businesses is an important aspect of gender lens investing, or GLI, and this session is directly informed by the research on mainstreaming GLI in developing countries that we at Intellecap have been conducting with the kind support from the IDRC over the last couple of years. To give you a very quick background about the research itself, the first phase of the research included an assessment of women-owned enterprises in the Global South, and we interviewed more than 200 women entrepreneurs in Kenya and Rwanda in East Africa, and in India and Indonesia in South and Southeast Asia. We wanted to understand the gender-specific challenges that they face, including and especially in accessing capital to scale their businesses. The findings were published in a report titled Mainstreaming GLI, an assessment of women-owned enterprises at last year's Sankalp. In the next phase, we looked at women-enabling businesses that I described earlier and spoke to over 150 employees, value chain partners, and customers of 20 such businesses in the 4 countries. The intent was to showcase the impact that such businesses create for the women they engage with, and to bring into focus the opportunity for GLI to look beyond women entrepreneurs and invest in such businesses. We are launching the findings today as a report titled On the Potential of GLI to Further Economic Empowerment. The report is available on our website as of this morning, and I request my colleague Agnes to paste the link to the report in the chat box. We would like to profusely thank the IDRC for the kind support towards this research, especially Flaubert for his inputs, and Catherine, who is one of the panelists today, for her continued support. All our panelists today have been intimately involved with the topic of impacting women through business, and I'm sure all of you are as eager to hear from them as I am. We have budgeted about 50 minutes for the panel discussion, after which we shall do a short Q&A. Please feel free to type in your questions in the chat window, and we shall take them up. I will now introduce the panelists in no particular order. We have Dr. Catherine Toure, who is Regional Director in Eastern and Southern Africa at the IDRC. We have Sarah Marchand, Director at Impact Group at CDC+. We have Antonia Nalunga, Director of International Expansion at GBU. And we have Wanjiku Muniri, Regional Manager of Impact and Evaluation at World Reader. Thank you to all our panelists for making the time to join us today. To start off, I would request Sarah to speak a little bit about CDC's approach to supporting GLI through investments in businesses that enable women, and how it has supported such investments over the years.
Thanks, Amar, and hi everybody. Very nice to see you all joining. It's an honor to be here with you today and to share some of the insights into the way that CDC thinks about gender smart businesses and how investors can make a difference to the lives of women. As Amar said, I'm Sarah Marchand. I'm a director in the Impact Group. I manage our technical assistance facility, which we call CDC+, which predominantly focuses on post-investment support with our investees, but has also done a lot of work in kind of building the field in terms of impact investing, including a lot of work on gender lens investing. In terms of our role in gender lens investing, we think about how we can use our role as an investor to close the gap between men and women at various levels of the private sector, of the corporate value chain, but also our role to understand better the gaps, the impact that the different interventions and the different investments can make, and also to disseminate and demonstrate that so that others can follow suit. We launched an intentional gender investing strategy several years ago now, in around 2017, and that laid out our approach to the way that we think about this. And I think it's very relevant here because it didn't just focus on women's leadership. It very much spelt out our approach, which looks at the role of women across the value chain in 4 main areas: in ownership, in leadership and in management, but also in the workforce and also as a consumer base. So we've been working on all of those different aspects over the last few years. And I think in this particular conversation, we're going to be focusing more on the workforce and consumer base, but there are certainly linkages between them that we see as well. We think that by identifying gender smart interventions, we can deliver impact, we can deliver social and economic value, and we can make a difference to women's lives. And that can be by providing decent jobs, and that can also be by serving unmet needs in terms of products and services. So we put quite a lot of time and effort in the last few years in terms of setting the industry standards. And I think I'll just start by maybe speaking a bit about that. So once we'd sort of launched this strategy that talks about this, this approach in all of these 4 different areas, we were a founding member of the 2X Challenge, a commitment by DFIs at the G7 a few years ago to direct 3 billion towards investments that advance women's economic empowerment by 2020. And that figure has actually been met, or in fact exceeded. So there'll be a new target being launched very soon at the G7 this year. And one of the things that CDC really put effort behind was a set of criteria or a measurement framework for how to think about which investment should qualify as advancing women's economic empowerment. And that we worked on and created the 2X criteria. We also made sure that that was aligned with other measurement frameworks that exist. So it's specifically aligned with IRIS+, and we worked a lot with the GIN to make sure of that. And those 2X criteria speak to the importance of these different roles that women can play in the private sector and the different ways that we can all support women. So the criteria do cover women's ownership, but they also cover the role in management, the role of women in workforce, or the number of women in the workforce, and also whether or not a business produces a product or a service that specifically or disproportionately impacts women. And there's also a criteria about how businesses or organizations finance women. So that's more specifically for funds and financial institutions, addressing the financing gap. And so to qualify in the 2X challenge as being an investment that advances women's economic empowerment, you need to qualify according to these criteria, and there are benchmarks and thresholds set. And in particular, in some of those criteria, they are sector specific to take account for the differences across the different sectors. But you can qualify based on workforce or based on producing a product that disproportionately or specifically targets women. It's not all about women as owners or women in the leadership team. And I think that kind of therefore speaks very specifically to the report that Intellecap is launching. In our portfolio, we have a number of investments that have qualified under 2X, and we see that they're qualifying across all of those criteria. In fact, the criteria that we see most frequently, and many of the investments qualify under several of the criteria, so they'll both have women in ownership and leadership, or etc. The criteria that we see most frequently are in leadership, so women as managers in the business in particular, but also in the workforce. So actually quite a high proportion of our investments have qualified because they have above benchmarks, or they've set a target above benchmarks in their sector for the proportion of women in their workforce. We have fewer that qualify under the products and services that target women. The ones that we do have so far tend to be microfinance institutions or businesses in the off-grid solar sector. But we do quite a lot of work post-investment with a broad array of our businesses to try and change that, even with businesses that aren't qualified in 2X. So I think that's something we can explore more today as well, and something that certainly I work on with the technical assistance facility. But with our gender team, who provide advisory directly to some of our businesses, but also using technical assistant to provide expertise and experience to our portfolio. We also work with our portfolio to help them do gender analysis, gender diagnostics, to understand the situation that they have today, to put in place action plans to change the proportion of women in the workforce, to try and reduce attrition levels, to put in place more women-friendly policies, and also to develop new products and services that do specifically or disproportionately target women. And we think that sometimes a subsidy is appropriate to just pilot something new or try and test or experiment with a new product. So very happy to speak more about some of those projects later, but I'll stop there for now and hand back to you, Emma.
All right. Thanks for that, Sarah. And you did mention two very important things. One is corporate value chains and post-investment support. And I would like to come back to you a little bit later to hear about what kind of such post-investment support or TA is required for various stakeholders, and not only investors, and what the current gaps are. For now, I would like to request Antonia to talk a little bit about how GBU has an impact on women in its supply chain, its franchisees essentially, and what more can be done.
All right, thank you, Omar, and good day to all the delegates and guests. Thanks to SunCalp for the opportunity to speak with the distinguished panel. So my name is Antonia. I launch GBU in new countries and support the partners to understand the brand standards and build their capacity to grow the brand in those new markets. So at GBU, we capitalize and equip franchisees to provide safe drinking water and other basic necessities to underserved communities via a social franchise business model. To date, we operate in 7 countries within Eastern and Central Africa and some parts of Southern Africa, that's Zambia. And we have in our direct markets, so we directly franchise in 3 markets, Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda. And we have master franchisees. So we license one partner to take over the whole country in 4 of those countries. So that's Congo, Zambia, Tanzania, and Burundi. So in our direct franchising markets, we have 113 franchises, of which 35% are women. And as you may know with franchising, what makes it successful is about trust, the goodwill from both parties. It's about ownership, that is the business owner bringing 100% of themselves every day to lead their teams to achieve certain goals and comply with brand standards. And it is also about compliance with the brand standards. And we find that women have imbibed these attributes more than our male franchisees. So for example, in Kenya, the best performing franchise is led by a woman. In Uganda, the best performing franchise is led by a woman. In Rwanda, same story. And we find that even opportunities for people to own more than one franchise. So the multi-unit franchises are typically women, where we give someone does so well, we give them a second franchise, and even in some cases, a third franchise. That means that they are doing good business, not just in terms of the P&L, in terms of sales, but holistically, when we do the audit of their whole franchise operations, we find that they do really, really well. So our business is structured in a way that helps to address some of the gaps that women usually face when operating a business. So some of them are, and the report highlights some of these: access to loans and credit. So with GBU, the model is structured in such a way that we provide capital financing. So for example, the water treatment system is on a lease. We either provide the capital directly or we partner with other providers like Kiva, where our franchisees can go to access very affordable credit. So then those biases that are present in the ecosystem, we come around them. And also work experience is not a big deal with our business model because we train the franchisee and their staff on every aspect of the business. We have the tools, we have the training, we have systems. So we find, in fact, one of our best performing franchises in Uganda, she had just come from school. She didn't really, the diploma didn't really have any work experience, but she has managed to do well with one franchise and even get another. And then education also to some extent with basic literacy, to, I don't know what the equivalent is, but in my country to be like secondary school certification. So with that kind of education, someone can operate a franchise really well, as long as they can add up all their money and count bottles and stuff like that. So with the training and the financing that we have access to and provide to our partners, we find that women are positioned to do well in our kind of business. Maybe to just make a distinction, from my experience, we've seen that agency plays a critical role. The women who come of their own volition to ask about the business opportunity generally do better than if, for example, we've also had instances where a husband comes to ask about the opportunity and then hands over the business to the wife. So we find that those ones don't do as well as the ones who make the decision independently, because they probably feel the burden of that capital coming from somewhere else, and then having to pay it back and having someone else pull the strings around, what decisions to make, and yet they're not on the ground. So that's one key point that I wanted to bring out. Yeah, so I'll stop here for now, and maybe we'll circle back on some of the things.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Antonia. And I think you did mention that GBU also provides access to credit for these franchisees to start up. And this is something that we heard in our research as well, that there is a need for capital, not just for the businesses, but also, one step further for their franchisees or for their value chain partners. And maybe gender-lens investors can chase this opportunity and support women enabling businesses by supporting the next tier of their employees. Which brings me to Catherine. Catherine, we would love to hear from you about the importance of supporting such businesses through research and action holders, given that Antonio also spoke a little bit.
Yeah, I might have had a little connection issue, but so I didn't 100% pick up on the question, but I wanted to speak a little bit about the importance when talking about gender lens investing of working with various stakeholders. And I wanted to just mention the Nigerian novelist, Chinua Achebe, and how he talked about the world is like a mask dancing. If you want to see it, you do not stand in one place. So for gender lens investing, to get an idea of what's going on overall, I think it's really important to look at the situation from the perspective of the investors, like Sarah, to look at things from the perspective of business and business supporters like Antonia, but then to do like Intellecap did and interview as well women working in women-centric or gender-smart enterprises, but also the customers of such businesses to know what the experience of the client is, if the business is making a difference for them, and how, not only within their agency, but perhaps even in the household or in the community. So just wanted to put that plug in there for the necessity of engaging with various stakeholders. And from a research perspective, of course, we call it triangulation. So I hear this here, I hear that there, and then when I put it all together, I'm able to come back and provide a bigger picture that will inform investors, that will inform strategists within business for business development, but then also how we engage with workers and clients in terms of marketing, product design. So that's what I wanted to share at this point, Amar. Later, I hope I'll have the opportunity to come back and mention a little bit more about next steps, possible next steps, and the need to really engage in the policy space so that we begin to have the regulatory frameworks that incentivize the use of a gender and inclusion lens when investing in business, so that we're pushing business in a new direction. and it will require that engagement at the policy level as well. So back to you, Amar, and happy to be here and to hear from everyone so far.
Got it. Yeah, thanks, Catherine. I think you mentioned something that we learned on the way as well, as the importance of triangulation. And as we have been, looking at impact measurement, especially on the women, we have to, look at both the quantitative and the qualitative aspects. And I think the 2X framework that Sarah mentioned earlier also speaks to this, where there are ways to capture the quantitative and also the ways to capture the qualitative. So I would like to bring in Wanjiku here, given her experience in impact measurement. Wanjiku, we would love to hear from you about how both quantitative and qualitative data is indispensable in showing the true impact of such women enabling businesses. Well, all businesses really, but especially such businesses. Wanjiku?
Thanks for having me, and hello from a warm Nairobi. My name is Wanjiku Munyiri, and I'm the Regional Manager for Impact and Evaluation at WorldReader, and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. WorldReader is a global non-profit organization that promotes digital reading in underserved communities, and we're headquartered in San Francisco, but we have offices in India, Europe, and across Africa. Books are very central to all that we do, and we pride ourselves in distributing a digital library of thousands of high quality, culturally relevant books that inspire and educate. And these books can be found on various platforms, e-readers, mobile phones, tablets, etc. But for purposes of this session, I will weigh in from an impact measurement perspective, and I will zero in on the work that WorldReader did through a project called Anasoma. Anasoma is a Swahili term that means she or he reads, and the project was a 2-year behavior change research project that was implemented in Kenya with an aim to identify the barriers of and the drivers to female mobile readership. This project was informed by work that we did with UNESCO that was dubbed Reading in the Mobile Era, that showed us that 23% of our WorldReader users were women, yet they consumed 6% more content than men. And this was quite interesting for us. So in an aim to design our programming to include women and girls, we embarked on an exploratory journey to establish what, when, and why women read what they read. And so I'm quite excited to give you and to share with you the details of the methodologies that we employed and the findings that we got from this particular project. And I think that will happen in when we circle back. So Amar, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Wanjiku. And I think it will also be great to hear a little bit about the impact on men, because I think I remember having this conversation with you about how we have been speaking about the impact on women and women-owned businesses. However, there is a wider mindset change that is required to really overcome patriarchy, and businesses such as yours have an important role to play there. So would love to hear from you about that as well. But coming back to Sarah. Sarah, could you talk a little bit about your experience on how well investors have been able to really track the impact on women through the investment period in women enabling businesses, and what kind of support have they required, and what are the gaps?
Thanks, Amar. Yeah, I mean, look, I think this is a space that's evolving, and it's evolving very, very fast. So from the CDC perspective, we have now integrated gender indicators into our annual monitoring system. So we now collect gender disaggregated data across our portfolio on an annual basis, and are able to therefore do analysis that can then inform more about where are some of the gaps in our portfolio, or the gaps in our in the work that our businesses are doing, so that we can then kind of fill those gaps, or seek to fill those gaps. And then what we, but I think we have to be realistic, and I defer to those who are monitoring and evaluation specialists here, but certainly my experience is that indicators that are aggregatable across an entire portfolio, by their very nature, frankly, have to be, simple and straightforward and aggregatable. And certainly we find that across our technical assistance portfolio when we're trying to talk about what is increasingly a large and very diverse portfolio. one often finds, and one often sees, I often see other investors and other organizations doing this, boiling down the impacts to a few aggregatable indicators that tend to focus on reach, I think, because that is more easily summed up and shared. And so I think that I don't think that means that it's not valuable to be looking across the portfolio and to be trying to find those indicators that you can sum up across a diverse set of businesses and activities. It's important and it gives us comparisons in a very light touch way, but it doesn't take away from the need to also look at depth. And that means really trying to understand in a more granular way, what difference these businesses, these investments are really making for women in their daily lives. And that is a much more involved activity to try and understand that. So I guess the way that we try and achieve that as CDC, but as I say, this is evolving for us as it is for everyone else, is that we complement that kind of cross-portfolio data collection with deep dives into certain portfolio companies and certain projects that we've done to really try and understand the before and after, and talk to the women, talk to the men, talk to all the players that have participated to really understand what has actually changed, so that we can then learn from that. And I think you learn a lot from getting to that level of detail. And we try sometimes, or often we'll also do that across a couple of different businesses where there are similar businesses, so that we can compare and contrast, or kind of understand where things have worked better versus less well, in order to draw conclusions. And I say that because I do think that's also part of what I mentioned at the beginning, was that part of our role, I think, as a DFI like CDC, is to measure the impact, but also to talk about the impact. When we do the deep dives in just one company, some of that information can be commercially sensitive, so that makes it harder for us to then disseminate that information. Whereas if we are able to collect data from a few different enterprises, then we can draw insights across those and share them more widely. So those are just a few thoughts from me, Amara. But yeah, keen to hear from others too.
Got it. Thanks for that. And I would just like to take a step back, and we have been talking about TA for investors and how investors can do the impact measurement to bring out this impact. How about TA for the intermediaries, for the support providers? And probably the intermediaries also need some level of sensitization to support not just women entrepreneurs, I think that's happening now, but these women enabling businesses. So I would like to bring in Antonia here, and request her to share her experience about support that she has received, or Kipu has received, from various entities, and how that has helped reach more women or incorporate more women in the supply chain, and what more needs to be done. Antonia?
Thanks, Amar. So like I mentioned in the introduction, I think the greatest support we've received is around the financing. So providing that capital financing, the working capital. So for example, our franchisees, if they need more working capital to buy more bottles, the jars where we package the water, that is available. We partner with Kiva. So Kiva trusts that we've done the vetting. So the credit is given solely because the franchisee is working with us. So all the barriers around collateral and what, they are not impacted by that. And so that's really important in attracting the women. If you take out the money factor, the working capital factor, then you can bring them to the table. And the other support is around capacity building, which is training. So like the report rightly presents, some women have not had the opportunity to attain that much education or even have the working experience. So we do train them in every aspect of the business, and they are encouraged to ask for direction, and we find that is another area. So we've also partnered with some other institutions like Danone Communities, who recently launched a loan an affordable interest loan that we accessed to support the training, set up a learning management system. So that has also helped to make the training more accessible, although it's still instructor-led because many of them with the gadgets and what, some may not have smartphones and all. But it helps to standardize the trainings. And another, it's not, this is specific to the business model, but the challenge of women having to work away from home, but then they need to manage their domestic affairs. I think that is addressed in our business model because we typically provide a franchise to someone in their community so that they can leverage that local knowledge and have accessibility to their homes. But the main points that I can think about where we've had so much support that has been helpful is around the training and the financing. But one other one that comes to mind is the mentors. I think if there was access to a pool of mentors who are probably paid by another institution, I think that would be something that would be useful because most women coming in, it's around, the confidence is low. And you find that when we are meeting with the men in the room, the male franchisees, or they are not speaking up, or they are sending little cheats to ask, can I talk about this? Can I talk about this? Whereas you never see men asking for permission to say anything. So I feel like if there was a group of mentors, female mentors who have succeeded in business that are probably paid by another institution, those would be very helpful to support them to grow in confidence. And yeah, that's what I can think about right now.
Got it. So you're speaking about mentors for these franchisees and not for Chibu itself, but the mentors for these franchisees, the micro entrepreneurs.
Yes.
All right. That's interesting, and that actually ties well with one of the questions that we have received, and maybe Catherine can weigh in on this. When we are talking about incorporating women in decision making, what are some of the challenges that are associated with making gender smart decision making mainstream? And who are the other stakeholders that can be involved at the local level to do this? We have spoken about incubators, accelerators, but the role for maybe the community members, and from your experience, how do you see the wider ecosystem playing a part in making gender smart decisions mainstream?
Yeah, thanks, colleagues, for the discussion, and Amar for the question. If I ever look distracted, I'm not. I'm just multitasking, like listening to Antonio at the same time that I'm tweeting something out about what she's saying. So trying to follow and contribute to his Twitter sphere at the same time in case that has, impact on advancing these ideas about gender lens investing. What Antonia said really resonates with the idea that yes, investing is important. Yes, finance is important, but it's not enough. We women need confidence building. We need mentors. We need our agency reinforced. We need to know that it's okay to bring ourselves to the table. And in fact, that if we don't, we're not going to be successful, and that we need to free up the energy that we have to make the difference that we can make. So maybe related to that and other partners that need to be mobilized. Sorry, Amar, I might not get all the way to the community level because I'm thinking about how the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, we from January 1st, we're supposed to be implementing it. And there are so many conversations going on across the continent about how to mainstream gender into that. Now, it's really important because intra-Africa trade is important. Intra-African investment is important, but in and of itself, it's not going to make the difference unless we have the accompanying regulatory and supportive environment. So I'm asking myself, to what degree can Intellecap and Sankalp and some of the others involved in gender lens investing make sure that they're engaged in those discussions that are going on? So it just seems like an entry point, and maybe that's already happening and I don't know enough about it. I am also thinking I mean, I'm in education, so I think about business schools in Africa. You know, who are some of the professors and lecturers or graduate students who are studying gender lens investing, lecturing about it, supporting young researchers on the continent to, you know, advance in this field? Are we getting it into the business schools in Africa is another question that I have. Otherwise, you kind of asked about gender and just how to work on gender and social inclusion. So maybe just a word from the IDRC experience. So we do, for example, we have a gender programming framework. And what that means is that every single research project that we fund, we look at it. Is it, well, nothing's going to be gender blind, first of all, because that would just be an investment of rare research dollars into something that might recreate existing powers of hierarchy instead of bring transformations that we need. So every single project will be gender and inclusive, aware, sensitive, or responsive. And then there's a whole area of research that we call gender transformative research. What does gender transformative research do? It actually asks questions that get at the root causes of discrimination. And so we think that there's a certain percentage of our portfolio, well, we don't actually measure it, but there's, you know, we need a certain number of projects at IDRC that are going to ask those questions that really get at root causes of discrimination. So, you know, in order to advance in organizations on gender, we need gender strategies, we need gender frameworks, we need to integrate it into our monitoring, learning, and evaluation frameworks. And of course, you need to engage men and women. I mean, if I'm in a community and I'm benefiting from, you know, the work that Antonia is doing, or that Wanjiku is doing, and the dynamics in my household start to change, or I have more agency, it's not quite enough. I mean, there has to be a sense of respect for equality and the understanding of the value of equality within the household and in the community overall, you know, to continue to move the needle. So I hope that that has responded somewhat to your question, Amar, and I turn things back over to you.
Sure, thanks, Catherine. I think that's a good segue into coming back to Wanjiku and hear from her a little bit about you know, how they are actually doing the impact measurement and how men are being involved as well.
Yeah, thanks, Amar, for that. And just, you know, yeah, as you mentioned, it's a perfect segue from what Catherine was mentioning. And I'll also try and attempt to address the questions that Tanvi has posted on the chat around challenges associated with gender smart decision making and mainstreaming of gender in programming. And for us, as I mentioned, specifically on the Anasoma project, we did come up with, or rather we were informed from a previous project that there was a disparity when it comes to our women readers and our male readers and the consumption of the content therein. And therefore, I think one of the challenges, Tanvi, is when you have inadequate evidence-based to kind of guide your programming, that it will be hard for you to mainstream gender. And for us, because we did have, you know, the research to back our project, we were then able to design with this project and to get in depth to understand the problems that women and girls are facing when it comes to mobile reading. And we mainstreamed gender in all stages of the implementation, you know, to better understand the quote unquote problem statement, you know, because, you know, after all, the wearer of the shoe is the one who knows where it pinches most. And so we incorporated girls and women from the beginning all the way to the very end. We were very intentional about our representative samples. We made sure that we included men in the conversations because we all know gender is a social construct. And if we leave out this particular group, you know, we won't go very far. So women and girls also of different ages, because we know whatever girls face and women face, if they have different, you know, different ages, there are definitely differences that will come up. And also the geographies also, informed our samples as well. We sought out to collect gender disaggregated data throughout the project, right? And we, you know, the aim of Anasoma was basically to provoke conversations and to positively affect gender norms and stereotypes using the power of books. As I mentioned, World Reader is, promotes digital reading, so we used the power of books because it was a hypothesis at the beginning that books could then start up these conversations and lead to agenda shifts. And I'm happy to report that it held, the hypothesis held, and we were able to actually start up conversations. And we did it in different methodologies. First off, we conducted an ethnographic research to basically understand what features or factors of the World Reader application needed to change to improve engagement among women and girls in Kenya. So we used semi-structured interviews, we used observation, we actually shadowed these women and selected girls to understand the influencers, the behaviors and attitudes towards reading. And this resulted in developing profiles of our users in the form of personas that gives us, that we use to date, and basically just gives us an understanding of what girls in Kenya within a certain age group, what influences them, what motivates them to read. And I'll give an example based off our research. We do know that between girls aged between 18 to 24 years are adventurous readers. They're the girls who read more than one book at a time. She reads a wide selection of genres and is very experimental with her books and authors. Her influencers are social media, parents, her peers. And so we use these different avenues to increase our reach, to increase our engagement, and also to retain our readers. Had it not been for that particular measurement or the M&E that we had to incorporate in the project, we wouldn't have understood our readers, and specifically girls and women. And then we also went ahead to subject our content to gender analysis, right? So we acquire books and content, our digital books, from authors, content providers, publishers. And so we did reach out to them and ask them, based on your understanding, on their understanding of gender empowerment, of women's empowerment, to send us some titles that we will subject for gender analysis. And we did this through two ways. One was we conducted book clubs, and we worked with the Kenya National Library Services. And I just want to inject here again to turn this question. You must work at local level, you must work with partners who are like-minded. And so for us, Kenya National Library Service aligned with our objective and with our mission as an organization. So we worked through them and established book clubs. It was quite interesting because we had different demographics of this book club. So we had book clubs that were strictly, all ladies, and we had one that was strictly all men, different geographies, urban, peri-urban, and rural. We had one that had mixed ages, and girls and boys. And so we subjected these titles to all the book clubs. And let me tell you, the discussions that emanated from those book clubs were different day and night, literally. Some titles were embraced by women and not so much by the men's book club. But we only implemented the book club for 4 months, which is not a long time to shift gender perspectives, or, to shift gender perspectives. However, the conversations that came out of there within those 4 months were quite encouraging. And I recall one of the discussions that I sat in for that was conducted in Murang'a, which is a rural, peri-urban area in central Kenya, where one of the men, having read a book that is entitled Imani's Dilemma, that you can find on our free application on Play Store, after they read it and during the discussions, one man actually said, and I quote, "Women scream in their silence." And for us, and for me specifically, that statement was just, it's very powerful to know the power that books have in changing gender stereotypes, in changing gender perceptions. And so we use that avenue to kind of take our content through gender analysis. The other one was we came up with a review panel, and the review panel consisted of students who are engaged, who are studying gender studies at the time. We hired a gender expert to kind of give us a criteria that will help us analyze these books in a critical way. And so we looked at different things, and I'll just touch on a few, including number of times characters come up. So we all know in a book, how many times and this were literally tally marks, how many times do women vis-a-vis men show up in a book, right? In terms of characters, how many what type of titles are used? Do we say Mr. John and Mrs. John, and then we hide the character of the woman under those titles? Who has the paid work vis-a-vis who has the unpaid work? Who has the white collar jobs? And even in white collar jobs, to what extent are women being brought out to hold positions of power? We looked at illustrations, guys. We got to that detail where we looked at, when you look at a picture, and when a small girl opens a book and sees this illustration of the girl or the woman in the forefront or at the back, who is being brought to the fore, who is holding the child, who is the nurse, who is the doctor, and all those things. And so we subjected all this, our content to all this kind of gender analysis. And it was quite interesting. As Catherine said, when it comes to matters gender, and when you're looking at measurement, impact measurement, you can't just look at it from one angle. So you have to employ different methods and triangulate them to kind of come up with, a statement of how impactful your project is. And so for us, that's what we did for Anasoma, and the learnings are still very insightful and still, inform future programming and the current programs that we have. So I'll stop there for now, Amar, unless there are, other questions or questions, I can answer the questions much later. Thanks.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Wanjiku. And I think you spoke a little bit about, ethnographic research and the level of detail that you went into. And it's quite apparent that a very high level of rigor is required in the M&E to really bring out these stories, which brings me back to Sarah. Sarah, how do we think we can empower investors to bring in this rigor? Is it just TA, or is it also the cost? And how do we tackle this?
To bring rigor in, you're asking about bringing rigor into the impacts measurement process,
right? And how do we support investors to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Look, I think funding for M&E is an ongoing and everlasting challenge. It always costs more than you would like, and even though, and I speak as a funder, even though funders would like to have all the information they possibly can have on impact on in all dimensions, we also somehow find it hard, or a lot of donors find it hard to find the space to pay for it. And I think it's true that really rich, really robust impact data is resource intensive to get hold of. Really going into the field and talking to people on the ground and then aggregating that and analyzing it takes time, it takes effort, it takes people who understand sensitivities, cultural sensitivities, lots of different languages, lots of different cultures, etc. So we shouldn't underestimate the nature of the challenge. How can we make it easier? I mean, coming back to 2x, at that kind of level, I think our hope is that we can start adopting that as some kind of industry standard, because I think if we can all be aligned in the type of data that we're collecting, then obviously that gives us more information that is more comparable, that gives us more benchmarks, that helps us to understand better where things are working and where things aren't working and what the gaps are. So I think industry standards are certainly very helpful. Budget is certainly very helpful. I think for us, when we're investing in an intermediated way, so i.e. when we're investing in investors, so if we're investing in funds or if we're investing in financial institutions, it's our job to ask them to collect that data and to align with those industry standards. But collection is also it's only the start. So yes, we can provide some technical assistance to sort of help them to set up the systems for collecting the data and the disaggregated data. But then it's also about making sure that we close the loop, because the collection of the data is only the beginning. You've got to collect the data, then you've got to understand what it's telling you, and then feed that back into things like product development and design and workforce, etc., in order for it to really make any difference. And so it's as much about being an active investor or board member or member of senior management to ask the questions once you do start getting some data coming through in terms of, okay, what is it telling us and what are you going to do about it? And then holding people to account on actually being action oriented in terms of changing things, and probably not pretending that we know the answers just because we have a bit of data either. I think sometimes it's about being clear that what we should do is experiment as well, and test and pilot. And I think that is where the technical assistants can play a role. So I think the role of technical assistants, sometimes we'll use technical assistants to provide training for management teams on these kinds of issues. And that's something that often our gender team just does directly with our funds teams or with our businesses, is we provide various types of kind of training just to raise awareness. Sometimes we will use technical assistance to help set up the systems for monitoring data and collecting the data. But then sometimes what we'll do is use a grant or a small subsidy to actually allow companies to test things that where they don't necessarily, well, we don't know. We have a hypothesis that it's going to change things for the better, but we don't know yet. And for some organizations, in many ways, in particular the bigger organizations, where it's harder to affect change, they haven't got the data, particularly the commercial and economic business case, to say we need to invest in something new, because we don't have the data to show that it's going to reap returns commercially or from an impact perspective. And so the subsidy can allow a business to then test something, try something. Ideally, we would be testing a couple of things at the same time so we can compare which one works better, and then adapting, not kind of just sticking to it because we thought it was going to work, but actually trying it, and if it's not working, changing tack partway through or abandoning it and trying something different. So I think our role, is to keep having those conversations throughout that kind of process, the collection, the analysis, the understanding, the testing, etc. And the TA can help provide the tools and the training and the guidance from all of you who are more experienced and more, have more expertise in this than necessarily, the people involved on the ground in every single business. Not everyone is an expert in gender lens or gender smart businesses, and so yeah, that's how I think the TA can help.
Got it. Thanks a lot. And I think you already touched upon something that I was coming to. You did mention that gathering good impact data is very resource intensive and very costly. But how is this information changing attitudes towards GLI? So is the impact data that is being captured really making a change the way funders are looking at investing? And do you see that this is really having a change in the mindset of the funders themselves, and the impact that is being created is made more apparent? So that's something that I would like to hear from you. But before that, I would just like to bring in Antonia a little bit and request her to speak about how the impact that they have tracked helped them in fundraising, or in their conversations with potential funders or existing funders.
Thanks, Amar. And I'll probably start with by picking up on Sarah's point about the work that goes into tracking the impact numbers. So previously we had a resource that was dedicated to collecting this data, but that was funded by a grant which ran out, and then we found that we didn't have capacity, so we shrunk down to the numbers that we can easily track. So now we just track female franchisees that we've recruited, and then as we do an audit of the business, which we do every 6 months, then we pick up on some things. So for example, the reason I said that female franchisees are performing better, it's not just because they sell more and make more money, but it's also because when we now audit, how well do you treat your team, your employees? Are you being fair to them? Are you imbibing good employment practices? We find that they do really well. Are they complying? Are they paying their taxes? Are they running a good business? So we find that they are better at the compliance. And there are certain aspects of impact. For example, you hear things like, my husband wants to take our child to that school, but because his friends' kids are there, but I think this other school is better, but I will top up the fees. Yeah. So that kind of impact, like how do you measure that over time? Because probably the child is getting better education, or in terms of health, to say, for example, we have a female franchisee who had a first baby in a public hospital. She lost the baby, and then when she had another child, she was making a bit more money, and she was able to go to a better hospital, and she had a much better experience. So how do we weave those into impact and impact measurement? And those are the things that take time, because you don't see the results immediately, because I mean, impact is still a peripheral, a department in the way we do business. So I think my dream would be just like we measure the businesses by, a standard P&L. How do we make it mainstream, impact mainstream, to make it part of how we measure business success, and not, just look at some things. Doing the right thing may not show up in your P&L immediately. If you're paying your staff better, it might even negatively impact your P&L initially. So how do we incorporate those impact indicators into mainstream business performance? With gender, someone, I think Agnes asked a question, how if our financing has been gender focused, and most of the financing we get is generic, but the incentives inbuilt in how to access the financing or how to get recurring loans tend to favor women, because some of the things, are you running a good business? Are you complying? We find that women tend to do those things better. So there are some incentives built in the criteria that do favor the women. I don't know if I've answered your question, Amar.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for that, Antonia. Back to you, Sarah. Any thoughts on how this impact data, capturing of this impact data, is channeling more capital with a gender lens, not just in the hands of investors, but one level above, in the hands of DFIs or in the hands of funds of funds?
Yeah, I would say that it is making a difference. I think investors are data hungry. And so I think that the more that we can bring data to bear in these conversations, I think there's a sort of moral imperative, and I think increasingly people are bought into the moral imperative of it. But in terms of allocating investment capital, the data certainly helps. And so I think the reports that we're starting to see more of, the IFC report that showed that kind of investing in businesses that have women in leadership makes a difference to returns, for example. I think that's very, very powerful. I think we need more of that, but we also need slightly different nuances of that as well, don't we? So, I mean, in particular, in relation to the conversation today, which has also been about women in the workforce and women as consumers, I think there's less data on that. I think we're starting to see that there's more data showing that if you invest in businesses that have women owners and women in leadership roles, that makes a difference to returns. And I think people are starting to kind of accept that is a fact, if you like. I think if we can start showing that investing in women businesses that have women as leaders and as owners translates into more women in the workforce and more products and services that reach women in the way that is needed, that would be great. I think there's some out there, but it's a bit anecdotal and it's a bit context specific, which perhaps is appropriate, but I think we need more of that. And then I think if we can make the final link as well, kind of how does having more women in the workforce and products for women, what is the real impact on the ground of that? We need the data at every step, and without a doubt, the more data we have, the easier it is for the likes of us to make the case to our investment committees that this is not just a moral imperative, but that it also makes commercial sense and it has the impact and we can prove it. Yeah, I have no doubt that it is making a difference already. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of the strategies and stated intentionality and targets. We're now setting a target around 2x investment, as are many of our peers. I think it is making a difference, but we just need to flow it all the way down as well.
Got it. Thanks for that. And I think we will hear a lot that the data is there and the moral imperative is of course there, but then we also need a call to action. And you did mention corporate supply chains earlier, and there is an increasing push all over the world to diversify corporate supply chains, and there is some action going on that front as well. So on that note, I'd just like to bring in Catherine here to talk about the free trade agreement that you mentioned a little earlier. And maybe inform us on how you think incorporating gender in such systems, not just from an investment perspective, but also from a trade agreement perspective and from a gender diverse sourcing perspective. How can all of these be utilized to further this cause of investing in women-owned and women-enabling businesses?
Yeah, thanks, Amar and colleagues. Let me answer that in a little bit of a roundabout way, going back to what Wanjiku was talking about and the power of books to create conversation and to challenge gender stereotypes, which are some of the structural barriers that we need to deal with at community and societal levels. At IDRC as well, when we did surveys internally to know how our colleagues learned about gender, I was surprised to see that I think it was about 80% said it's through conversation. So let's not underestimate the power of these stories. And I'm even wondering if Wanjiku is now going to, and her organization is now going to take some of the ethnographic work that Intellecap did and you published this morning on the web to inform future storybooks about contextualize businesses. Like my own children challenge us that we didn't show them enough about business because we're more like in academia and universities and always encouraging them to do certain kinds of activities. Yet they can pick those things up through books. Anyway, so that the power of stories, let's not underestimate that. And that's partly what Intellecap has done in this work, where you've interviewed 150 people, 20 different businesses, 4 different countries. You've given faces to the people in these businesses, the clients of these businesses. And so that's important. We get a feel for who these people are, because at the end of the day, profits are important, but we're also talking about doing business in a different way, in a more caring economy, where we also protect the environment and care for each other and the community. So the question in my mind, from the research perspective, is also, what Intellecap and others can do with the work that you have done. Because as Sarah said, we need data, but we never have enough money to get all the data that we need. So there's only a little bit of research money and the needs are infinite. So what are the best ways to invest that? I don't know, but asking the question, I think, is important. Is it important to now use the qualitative work as the basis for larger quantitative studies so that we can actually say, okay, there's impact, but now we've done quantitative studies to say, ooh, this is the amount of the impact, because then that continues to build the business case to go toward this more caring economy, which, if you want to go, which also means ultimately even challenging indicators like GDP. Is GDP sufficient for as an indicator to measure the kinds of economies that we need in the future? Grasa Machel speaks a lot to that. So the question in my mind is, how to best invest the next research dollars to advance in the area of gender lens investing, to move businesses and economies to where we need to move in the future. And at IDRC, we just launched a strategy 2030. So our first time we did a 10-year strategy. And we have an area, we have 5 program areas, and it's in the area called Sustainable Inclusive Economies, where we're having conversations about these questions. So today's discussion will feed into discussions that we are having internally. So I wanted to recognize that as well. Thanks so much, Amar.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for that. Now, I think we have an interesting question in the comment where we are saying where we're saying that in some cases gender-based violence can arise as a result of women being empowered financially from investments made by GLI. And how do we support women to avoid such situations? Now, any of the panelists are free to answer this question. But my personal take is this a question for the investors to answer, or is this a wider question for the society to answer? And is there a role for pedagogy here? Is there a role for the non-governmental sector here? Any thoughts, Wanjiku, Sarah?
I mean, I'm happy to have a go. I certainly don't know that I'm a specialist in the area who's qualified, but look, a couple of thoughts. I think it's a really, really good question. And I think it's something that certainly throughout my time working in development has been something that we have at the back of our minds as we empower women further and put income into their hands. We're often cautioned and thinking about what can be some of the implications of that at home. And I think although we're conscious of it, there's probably not kind of widely understood or recognized ways to mitigate those in advance. So I think it would be a really great space for there to be more work done and more support provided to them and more support provided to the ecosystem to understand how to think about it better and what to do about it. The one thing I will say is that I think gender-based violence is an area, along with all of kind of safeguarding and other areas of safeguarding, that is, you know, very much a lens that we put on all of the investments that we make and all of the post-investment monitoring and support that we provide to businesses. So, you know, that it's not something that we take lightly at all as CDC, certainly. But yeah, Wanjiku, speak from where you're sitting. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a tough question. It's hard to reconcile what we know in theory around gender and women's empowerment, and to reconcile that with the practical side of our lives as women, especially, and I can see your Eunice Matu, so I know we're sharing the same space in terms of being in Kenya together, and especially with how women's matters are taken in our context. It's very hard to reconcile. I honestly don't have an answer, but I will say that, yeah, it's very hard to reconcile. So I honestly don't have an answer to that. But from an organization perspective, we did realize, okay, so another angle that we had in Anasoma is we created content and we had a writing contest, and we asked people to, you know, we advertised on mainstream media and on our social media pages, and we asked authors or content providers to kind of submit you know, a piece that would kind of help us mitigate this gap or to bridge the gap that we found with the current books that are in the market. It was quite interesting to find that most of the content that was sent to us had a narrative where for a woman to shine, the man doesn't exist. You know, so you find a couple or a story where there's a couple and then the man somehow dies and then the woman is then raised to hold a certain position in the society. So it was quite sad to know or to read that kind of content, but it is a reflection of the society that we are in. So a lot of work has gone into bringing women into positions of leadership whether in different fields, business, politically, etc. However, those gains that are even enshrined in the Constitution, there is a lot of work that will have to come around when it comes to implementation. So it's not an answer that I have now. I think we've taken steps close, we're taking steps that will make us arrive to that destination that we all want, where there's equality and opportunities for all, without having to suppress the other gender. So yeah, it's a long journey, but we're taking steps in the right direction.
If I could come in here as well, I think that question by Esther really brought up some very interesting, probably one of my biggest learnings as we were carrying out this research over the last 2 years. So the questions that we would go asking a lot of women entrepreneurs, trying to find out how their agency has improved, the impact that running their businesses has had on their lives, was what do you need as support for you to grow? Is it financing? Is it capital? How can we be able to ensure that your business scales to the next level? And so there are always matters or gaps that you can address when it comes to the business of a specific woman or this women-led enterprises. But then the reason why a lot of women actually get into business is and get into agency is because they want to have security, not just for themselves but sometimes for the family. And so sometimes women will take up loans for their businesses, but then if a child doesn't have school fees, or if you're facing the hugest burden on making sure that they have healthcare, that's where you direct the money. And so there's so many solutions that we can keep providing towards the businesses, but as if we keep ignoring the social aspect, the purpose of why she's even in this business, and that's that's I think what Esther actually brought up, issues such as GBV, issues such as maybe divorce or unequal balances in their situations at home, then a lot of the solutions that we keep providing towards the businesses may not work because they keep being driven back home. And so there's a need to create a good enabling environment for the woman back at home in her community, for her to be able to now actually focus on her business, and whatever interventions you bring in that are going to be business focused actually work within that sphere. And I think, like Amar said, it's a very wider conversation. There's a lot of policy and legislation and maybe even work by civil society that needs to come in here. We can be able to go as far as helping and support the business and find out what it means for their livelihoods and agency and create all of this data, but it's a much bigger conversation to be had. And I think it's a very critical conversation to be had if we're thinking about the holistic growth of women, their well-being and their economic participation as well.
Thanks, Agnes. Antonia, would you like to come in on this from your experience?
I think from like everyone says, it's one of those questions that baffles us, all of us. And from what the previous speakers have said, it's from my experience, it's been about the networks that the entrepreneur has, who she's comfortable to talk to about certain things, and then sometimes I think what makes it complicated is that the source is different. So the violence, if it's coming from the spouse, it's difficult to understand their reasons. They may express one or two things, or you're coming home late, as the reasons, but we don't even know if that's, so we don't know the root cause of that. So, that really makes it complicated. But yeah, for some of those things, if it is clear, it's, it's the cause of the violence is a specific thing. And then, like Agnes said, civil society, churches, and then you can steer the, the female entrepreneur to, places where she can be supported. But I cannot say that we are equipped to deal with, with all the cases and all the incidences that happens. It is a much bigger conversation, like everyone has said.
Got it. Thanks for that, Antonia. Catherine, would you like to come in on this topic, please?
I can comment from a little bit about the perspective that Sarah was taking about safeguarding. And when we fund researchers, yes, there can be backlash against researchers depending on the topic that they're researching when they go into communities, when they engage with people. So from an ethical perspective, we have to consider these things from the outset and not when we find ourselves in the situation. So in our protocols, we do try to anticipate these things with grantees, talk them through, try to know what the safeguarding and risk mitigation measures are. And then we have an ethics committee within our organization, IDRC, that we can take these issues to for more insight and expertise. And then projects also get approved sometime by a university. So there's an ethical committee looking there that needs to be attuned to these issues as well, or granting councils, like in the case of Kenya, NACOSTI. So collectively, all of us who approve research projects need to take these issues into account. And then also within our organizations, ensure that we are advocating for learning about harassment prevention. You know, I can unknowingly be harassing, and we need an environment in our organization where we can recognize that, where we can call it out before it grows into something else. So there's just, as others have said, so much to be done at so many levels. Two final comments on that. From a philanthropy or a funder's perspective, Ford Foundation is a little bit leading the way. They have case studies on their website as to what they have done in terms of safeguarding, harassment prevention, and things like that. So it's a resource for people. And we need so much, but we've heard about gender-based violence in South Africa. And so during 16 days of activism, we heard the president of South Africa coming and speaking directly about it, about how sometimes men are brought up to feel like they're superior to their mother or brother or sister. And so to hear at the highest national level, bringing attention to that and calling it out, it's not going to resolve the issue overnight. But that is also something that has to continue to happen. Thanks, Amar.
All right. Thanks for that, Catherine. I have just been informed that we have a little more than 10 minutes. So I would like to, come back to all of you for some closing comments. But before we do that, since we spoke about women in corporate supply chains and trade agreements, I would just like to, use this opportunity to share an update from our friends at We Connect International about the Rise to the Challenge initiative that they are pioneering, that seeks to bring corporate, multilateral, and government buyers together with qualified women suppliers around the world to encourage gender diversity in corporate supply chains. As such, the Rise to the Challenge campaign is focused on challenging institutional buyers to commit and to act on inclusive sourcing. This is critical given that meaningful change has been agonizingly slow for the majority of women around the world. And one of the ways to accelerate progress is for large buyers to proactively include more women businesses in procurement opportunities. And progress towards SDG 5 can only be made with the intentional and visible actions from senior leaders of large organizations, supported by sourcing from women-owned and women-enabling businesses. So I would invite everyone to visit the website that will now be pasted in the chat box for more information. And recognizing that gender inclusive sourcing is not only a social issue, it's also a business opportunity. So with that, I'll just come back to our panelists for a couple of closing comments. Sarah. Yes, I was just saying, would you like to, say some final words as we come to an end?
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks very much for having me. This has been a really great and very interactive session. So thank you for hosting such a great event. It's great to kind of be focused in women. I think it's particularly great to focus on not just women as leaders. We all know that that's very important, but I think it is right that I think it is true that has been the right entry point into all of these discussions a few years back. But now to be thinking more broadly about women as employees and as consumers and franchisees and children and girls as readers and future champions for these issues. So really great to be thinking about it across the piece. I think from the CDC perspective, I hope that you'll take away, at least some sense of the 2X framework and the fact that that does attempt to kind of think about all of these issues. But I think we're on a journey. So as we've talked about a bit in the chat, there's still a long way to go in terms of businesses recognizing the business opportunity that women can women do represent, I should say, and then once they've recognized that, kind of understanding how to tap into it in terms of product development and design of products and services for women. So we're looking forward to continuing to be part of that journey, and I think for us, looking forward to continuing to nudge and encourage and facilitate those investing in women through funds and financial institutions. And I think you'll see us in the next few months even making some announcements in terms of commitments, particularly at a funds level, because that's how we really can get to scale, is where we are supporting those that invest, who then invest in women, and supporting them and encouraging them to invest in women throughout the business and throughout the corporate value chain. But yeah, also supporting the businesses that we already have in the portfolio to think across the piece about women. I did see that there was a question about highlighting some success stories, and I think we've run out of time, but we do have good examples in the portfolio of where we've worked with businesses to starting with diagnostics and action plans, and then seeing we're now starting to see the fruit of that in terms of more women in the business, lower attrition, particularly in the workforce of women as people put in place more women-friendly policies, etc. But very happy to take that question offline for people who want to hear more. Yeah, and looking forward to continuing all of this good work.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for that, and thanks for your time. Antonia, would you like to go next?
Sure. It's been an absolute joy hearing about what everyone is doing, and such a rich discussion on the topic. And maybe in closing for us, we found that our women franchisees have been good for the, giving them that opportunity has been good for them and their families in terms of quality of healthcare, education. They've been good for the business. We find that they are more compliant, they are performing better, and they've been good to their staff in terms of how well they treat their staff. And I think, like we talked about earlier, the big question is how to incorporate that kind of impact into mainstream business reporting. How do we make it part of, a good business, a successful business? And the other thing we've learned is to effectively support women, we have to take a holistic approach. Not just the financing, they need capacity building. They need a network of other women to discuss some of the things that we were talking about, gender-based violence, impart wisdom. How can they deal with those kinds of things as the other initiatives take shape, the government initiatives, civil society. So how do we create a network that can support them to solve those issues? And also confidence building. So is this through mentors? Is it through other figures within the organization? So to really take that holistic approach and not just look at funding or capacity building in isolation. It's been an absolute pleasure to be part of the panel. Thank you.
Got it. Thanks. So we do take away that it's not just the capital, but a capital plus model, as we call it, that is really essential. Wanjiko, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for setting this session up, and thank you for my fellow panelists. It's been exciting to hear and to learn from you. In closing, I would just like to say that I know that data is expensive, gathering data is expensive, but the lack of that data is equally expensive, if not more, especially when we're dealing with groups that have been neglected for years, and women and girls are in that group. So I implore you to include women in all your areas of project design, management, implementation. use methodologies that are friendly towards women, that include women and girls, and understand your different contexts, because we know gender is it's fluid, it will keep changing, and it's very specific to different contexts, and adjust accordingly for long-lasting impact. And this will, this will bring and close that existing gender gap that exists. So thank you for having me. Looking forward to engaging with you, offline, and all the other people who have attended. So thank you, Amar.
Thanks, Wanjiku. Thanks again for everybody for your time, and we'd just like to close with some last words from Catherine.
Well, first of all, I second what my co-panelists said and what Wanjiku just said about integrating gender and inclusion into all that we do. So thanks to Agnes and to Amar for creating this space and this discussion, the sharing and the learning. We look forward to, I read the whole introduction to the report on gender lens investing, so look forward to reading the rest of the report, and I'm sure others of us here too have become interested in browsing through that and helping to contribute to the next steps. Thanks to Sarah, Wanjiku, and Antonio, my co-panelists. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today. It's been a real convivial conversation. Like we said before, conversation is part of social change. So in this virtual setting, we actually are contributing somewhat to social change. My main message is about partnerships. IDRC, in the new strategy that we just launched, our third strategic objective after investing in high quality research and doing outreach, is really to mobilize partnerships, because none of us can do anything alone. So if you are out there and you're a mover and a shaker in this realm, and you have ideas of the types of partnerships that need to be mounted, including with private sector partners, then just let us know. I have some colleagues online. Angela is our communications expert here in Nairobi. And Flaubert, who's been providing support to this project. At least I saw him on, he's online. You can private message him. He's been supporting Agnes and Amar on this project from our Dakar office. And I saw that our new colleague, Annette, I think, let me check. Yes, Annette Abenako Mulema is also online, and she's working in our growing opportunities, economic opportunities for women program. So just wanted to introduce those colleagues, let you know that they're here, that you can reach out to them, direct message them, and that at IDRC, we really believe in convivial conversation, but partnerships. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Catherine. And I think you have reinforced one of the main messages that Sankalp Forum as a platform wishes to, really further, that it's about building coalitions and it's about being in this together. So even if you're not able to find these people here in this chat, please feel free to go back to Brella and use that networking platform to reach out to them. So thank you again for your time. I think we are right on the minute, so we'll close this on time. And thank you once again. Thank you. Thank you for